All right, let's continue with another round. So we're up for round 2. Okay. I'm gonna see. This is dangerous. Can I spill the beans?
Sure. Spill more.
Jeremy?
Yeah.
We're recording this a week before this episode is coming out. So,
wow, I didn't even know that.
Unbelievable, John.
Are you? It's not the 22nd?
No, it's not actually.
Oh,
shockingly. So we have not seen the final 2 preseason games. So what I'm about to say could be bold because literally by the time this episode airs, it could look utterly ridiculous based on how minutes get distributed over the final 2 preseason games. At the same time, if the player that I'm about to talk about, well, he's going to get off the bench for at least one of the preseason games because they're playing. It's a back-to-back, and we've already been told that they're not going to go with all their guys on the back-to-back. That said, it could still look pretty silly, and it's going to sound silly regardless of what happens in the final 2 preseason games. But I digress. I think Evan Fournier is going to play a role for this team this year. And I don't think he's going to be part of the healthy rotation. But in a newsletter that by the time you're listening to this, I will have written last Monday. As I talk about in that newsletter, and everybody knows, it's obvious, guys get hurt every year. You know, the Knicks were one of the healthiest teams in the league last year, the second or third healthiest team, and they still missed over 100 player games due to injury. What happened with the Kings last year is an anomaly where they had like 50-something games missed. Like, guys are going to miss games. You look at the Knicks, you look at how they play. Like, Josh Hart dove into the freaking stands 7 seconds into his first, on-court action. Like Brunson's kind of a smaller guard. He's a tough guard, but he's a smaller guard. Like, I think, we're going to see a lot of time where this rotation is not fully healthy. And I think Fournier is going to be the guy that gets the call. And I think he's going to be the guy that gets the call for a few reasons. One, this is the first thing that has to happen. He has to be here. He can't get traded. And Jeremy and I talked on last week's episode. I don't think he's getting traded. Again, could look ridiculous. I have to edit this whole portion out if he somehow gets traded before this episode airs. But I don't think he's going to get traded, at least until the deadline. So that's number one. Number two, I think if you look at the Knicks rotation and you talk about like, okay, what happens if this guy has to sit a game? That guy has to sit a game. I think the only player where if you're like, he has to miss games, maybe would give me hesitation that it's not Fournier gets the call, is Josh Hart. And that's if Tibbs wants to stick with the rotation that he has. And in that case, I think maybe Jericho Sims gets minutes. Everybody else, DiVincenzo, Grimes, RJ, even Julius Randle, I think you can foresee Fournier just slotting very equally or very seamlessly into the rotation. And that I think includes if Brunson or Quickly goes out, because I think part of the advantage of having DiVincenzo on this team is, I'm not calling DiVincenzo a point guard or even a combo guard, but like, I wonder if Brunson or Quickly went out. We know he's comfortable playing Quickly 40 minutes a game in games that Brunson missed because he did last year, almost 40 minutes a game. So it's like he's buying 10 minutes at the point guard position. I could see him just trusting Dante DiVincenzo with that time and slotting Fournier in basically as the wing replacement for Dante's role that he usually plays in the backup. I'm going on way too long about this. I need to give a specific thing to make this real, because I can't just say he's going to play a role. But how about this? I think he plays more non-garbage time minutes than Deuce this year, or Sims for that matter. So there's my second prediction.
I was about to ask you, not very high on Deuce?
It's not that I'm not high on Deuce. I like Deuce. I think Deuce is we know what Deuce is. I don't know that with the complexion, the way the team is now, I think when he was inserted into the rotation last year, I think they needed a jolt, and I think it was a jolt that he provided because he just brings what Deuce brings, and it's unmistakable. I think this is a little bit of a different team now. I think they're in a little bit of a different place. And talking about guys who could miss time, I think Tibbs he's a creature of habit. He wants to have the least amount of disruption possible. And I think Fournier kind of would give them that because he's a guy you plug in, you're not going to have any offensive drop off. Whereas Deuce, it's like, okay, we're trading in whatever offense we lost with pick whatever player for defense. And like, how do we cobble that together? Yeah, I think that's where I'm at.
I'll step in here. I think this is extremely bold.
Okay.
So let me tell you why.
Sure.
I hear what you're saying in terms of the Deuce's offensive struggles versus Fournier's defensive struggles. Fournier, we know his defense is not going to improve. I don't think we can say the same about Deuce's offense. He did make some sort of improvement last year. It's more that in terms of we're talking minutes, Deuce McBride played in 60 of the final 67 games that the Knicks had. Yeah. And he played like 12 and a half minutes per game. Yeah. So to me, a lot of that time didn't necessarily come from garbage time. It was seeing him as an active member. Absolutely. And it's hard for me to visualize the Knicks saying, well, we know that Evan Fournier is on the way out and everyone knows who he is, but we're going to fall into the pitfall of let's play him because maybe we can showcase him in a way that is different. We know what the net rating was when Fournier was removed from the rotation. Tibbs knows that. And that's the most important part, where the Knicks adding DiVincenzo should mitigate any need to play Evan Fournier, and you can bring in a more defensive player. To me, it's if your name is not Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson, and you are struggling to be even a neutral defender, someone else will probably come in and take your minutes because that's just it's not a meritocracy, but it kind of is when you weigh the defensive part. Again, it's still not, but the defense matters a lot to Tibbs. And granted, the shooting does too. The offense does. But the Knicks being able to be a competent. They were the second best offense in the league by common metrics. They don't need Fournier. He doesn't really add anything to them that they don't feel like they have in-house with the 9-10 guys that would likely be before him. And with Sims, I mean, I feel like because of the fact that Tibbs loves having three centers and Mitchell Robinson is not the healthiest player.
He said as much, yeah.
And we know, like, again, if Hartenstein's shooting more threes, and that opens up an avenue for a non-shooter like Sims. I just don't think that with Fournier, it's kind of like Mean Girls, like not specifically you, but stop trying to make Fournier happen. It's not going to happen.
I'm not the Fournier guy. You know me. I'm not the guy.
I know you're not. I get it.
Back in the rotation.
I get it. But I don't think that it's going to happen to that point, which is why I feel having Deuce or Sims play fewer minutes is bold.
Okay. That's fair. I mean, the one thing I'll just say briefly before we get to Alex and Gavin, if they have anything to do other than laugh at this prediction, is that the backup unit, even assuming pick your, again, because the whole premise of this is that if somebody gets hurt or if someone has to miss a few games, even so, I have a hard time seeing that backup unit ever struggling on the defensive end because I think it's just going to be filled with really solid defenders. And I think the downside risk will be how the hell are we going to score with Jalen Brunson off the court? So if that is a concern, I think Fournier is the easier alleviation to that concern than Deuce. Although I also get where you're kind. I think both are valid arguments for sure.
I think that Mr. Embracer of net rating, Tom Thibodeau, is not going to overlook the fact that Quickly and Deuce have been just on a pure per minute basis for each of their respective careers. They've been one of the, if you take all context out of it, which, of course, it's been some kind of weird situations and stuff, but those two have been one of the most deadly two-man combos in the NBA. If you just look at the pure, like, on-off, like, plus-minus, all that crap.
Totally.
I don't think you would overlook that if it came to a time where, like, Brunson has to sit a couple games or...
He might not.
Yeah. And so
this is bold.
Yeah, it is. It's very bold. I as apparently last year's chairman of the Evan Fournier fan club, I'm very much
you passed the baton officially.
Yeah,
right.
This is a real moment. In
John's just taking it.
Okay,
they don't want the baton.
It's yours.
Again,
I'm very
holding it.
I'm very much an expat now. I'm taking up residence on Deuce Island. You know, I'm done. I think I'm off the Fournier train, off Fournier Island. You know, whatever. I think I'm over here on Deuce Island now because I don't see a world where Tibbs really trusts Fournier with a real role again. Maybe there's one. I think it's more likely that he would see minutes if like DiVincenzo was hurt, maybe just because then it's like it's completely indispensable that this guy is like shooting 40% from three, and we really need that more than we need what the considerable talents he brings on the defensive end in this particular moment. And maybe that would lead to like 5 minutes here or there. But I also think that in that situation, he would situationally play Deuce and Fournier, depending on what they needed more out of that spot in the lineup at that moment. So I guess we'll see. But in theory, like the offensive concerns should be more alleviated this year if you would lose a Jalen Brunson for a couple games than
in
last
theory,
year.
Yes.
In theory. So then you could say, well, we can eat the offensive loss and just focus on being the best we can be on defense. I think that would be my thought as far as Tibbs' thought process. So all that is to say, I think you're very much passing the bold Scoville meter here. I think you're quite spicy so far. That's my assessment.
We're in Scotch bonnet territory. Gavin, any thoughts?
Yeah, maybe a Geiger counter necessary. But I referenced this. It's now about an hour ago, so I'll say it again. Out of every lineup in the NBA that played 50 or more minutes last year, which is a small number to be fair, that's obviously less than a minute per game over the course of a season. But with the caveat that one of these guys was traded for with 25 games left in the year, the third best lineup in the entire NBA, 50 or more minutes last year, was Isaiah Hartenstein, Josh Hart, RJ Barrett, Obi Toppin, and Deuce McBride. It had a plus 38.7 net rating. They scored just under 140 points per 100 possessions. Again, extraordinarily small sample size, but Deuce had an exceptionally positive impact. There was that stretch, like when the Knicks turned their season around, he had the best defensive rating of any player in the NBA. Again, small sample size galore in this comment, but made 4 threes in like about a fourth quarter in one preseason game. It was against the Timberwolves, like fifth stringers. So who knows if that mattered, but the shot looked a little bit better. He looked a little bit more confident taking it. That being said, I'm going to throw John a bone here because I honestly really like the look of DiVincenzo and Fournier on the court together. And I think the Knicks were, and I'll reference this on the Locked On Knicks side of things, but they were making more of an effort to play with pace and to just like even off of a make to push the ball up the court. And I think that really helped Fournier because he's not a guy at this point that the Knicks are going to structure a lot of half court offense around. But in transition, he's still like probably one of the 25 or so best shooters on planet Earth. And like he is extremely deadly in a lineup that is full of passers, full of like probably guys 1 through 4, like depending on who the injury is, that can create with the basketball and spray it out. Like I think those lineups would put up incredible offensive numbers. And to John's point, would have an infrastructure to play good defense. Like I'm not knocking it because I think those lineups would suck. I just think Deuce is probably at least as good of an option. And that if an injury is going to occur, I think the most likely thing that's going to happen is Quentin Grimes is going to skyrocket to like 42 minutes per game, or like DiVincenzo could end up playing 30 plus minutes per game, and Tibbs will lean further. Like, so maybe your statement will still be right, but I think it'll be a minimal role almost no matter what.
There is absolutely a possibility where someone go pick any one of the non-centers. Someone goes down and it's like a glorified 8-man rotation, you know, and it's someone getting 5 minutes or something here or there. Well, listen, that's why it's bold, as they say. Jeremy, I pass the baton to you.
Sure. Well,
in bold, or what are we doing?
Really quickly, Alex had mentioned, I like the term Deuce Island. Isn't that just a toilet? Which is also bold, if you catch my drift. So thank you. I'll be here.
So the Deuce is the island in the toilet, or
exactly? It's a floating island. It's,
you're on a log.
It's not always a floating island.
It's Pangea, you know. Anyways,
lost the thread.
That's okay. We can find the thread in the book.
I thought about it. I didn't want to say it.
So, all right, this is the last one of this portion. So I'm closing this one out.
Yes, you are.
So I figure if I'm going to be bold, I'm going to be bold to close it. So there's a cliffhanger to the next one. It's, oh my God, what's going on? I liked where Gavin was going in terms of his bold prediction. I think that is an interesting direction. And I was debating on how I wanted to go about this. The first thought that I had was this is the last year that the front court is playing together. And I thought that's bold considering they've played together for 4 years, but it's not like there haven't been trade rumors abound that RJ Barrett's been in, or if there's a center like Joel Embiid, that Mitchell Robinson would naturally not be here for that. Yeah. So the direction I'm going to go in is one step further. Stephen Bondi mentioned a few names, right? And they've been bandied about before. Karl Anthony Towns in New York recently for the Timberwolves game. There are financial reasons why it doesn't really make a ton of sense. Defensive reasons why it doesn't maybe make a ton of sense. And the trade kind of working out between those two teams. There's Joel Embiid, who we just talked about, of course, and thought, maybe this isn't it. And then, telling you, the stock is really low right now if we're talking about a potential Donovan Mitchell trade by the time we next record a podcast.
Oh, boy.
So here's why. And I just want to put this out. I know we have these bold takes, right? And they could just be hot takes. But the thing that I always love that we do every year is we also use compelling data to back up our claims. It's not like we just say things and nothing happens. So I'm going to try to continue. Fair enough. I'm going to try to continue that streak with this. So here's what I'm envisioning. Cavs have a really phenomenal regular season. I could see them being the number one team in the East in the regular season. And then the playoffs come around and they got deeper for sure. But do they have the one thing that they really struggled with the Knicks on, which was the sheer strength? I mean, the Knicks were a physical team that just Julius Randle looked unstoppable, even when he was bad, just the sheer force that he had. So let's say we get to next offseason and the Cavs want to offer Donovan Mitchell a max contract. And if he takes it, this whole conversation is moot, which is understandable. But what if he doesn't? We're talking about now a player who's 1 year away from unrestricted free agency. And if you're the Cavs, you're thinking, if Donovan Mitchell's not taking this max extension now, what's he waiting on? He clearly doesn't seem to want to be here because the money would kick in. He'd be fine. We can't give him a super max because he was traded after his rookie contract. So what's going on, Donovan? What are we going to do here? And I think you're then going to start hearing things about Donovan really wants to get to New York. Well, there is a New York team when Donovan Mitchell would be a free agent that will have potentially a lot of cap space. And it's not the Knicks. It's actually the Nets. And the threat of Donovan Mitchell going to a New York team that can just sign him for nothing could be terrifying to the Cavs. So it's the thought process of he's not extending and he could leave for nothing. And we traded all of these picks and the last year's, or 2 years, I guess at this point, most improved player in Lauri Markkanen. That's really bad for us. We can't do that. So if we have to go into damage control, something is better than nothing. And something is where a team like the New York Knicks would come into play. And that was Donovan Mitchell was one of the players that Bondi had mentioned. And it's the thought process to me of the Cavs don't want to do this, but again, something is better than nothing. And the Knicks could look at their team and say, well, we have picks. We have young players. Like, theoretically speaking, an extended Emmanuel Quickley, who is under a 5-year contract, that's got to be pretty good for a team like the Cavs if that's where the direction they wanted to go in, where they had no choice. There's another salary, like RJ Barrett. It's probably not someone like Julius Randle unless it's a 3-team deal. It's probably not Mitchell Robinson for a similar reason. So it's all to say that if this is the long game and Donovan Mitchell just doesn't want to be in Cleveland, it opens the door here where he could also try to do something sneakier, which is, let's say he goes somewhere, like another team trades for him and he still just doesn't want to be there. He could always opt into the player option and then do a sign and trade the following year, but he would lose out on a lot of money. So again, I fully recognize that any star talk that we talk about is bold because the idea of a player being traded from their team, why would their team want to give them up, is inherently bold. But how many of these players have very little team control? Or how many of these teams have limited team control of these players and are walking into a situation where another suitor could just take that player and you're left wondering where you went wrong?
if we want just a temp check of where people in Cleveland are on this, for example, we've developed quite a strong relationship with our Locked On Cavs buddies.
As has Andrew.
Yeah. Evan Dammerel, especially, like he and I talk, it feels like almost every month or two now at this point, do a crossover podcast.
Yeah.
There's so many ties that bind with the Knicks and Cavs right now. And he straight up like just basically brought up to me unprompted, so what do you think about the Donovan Mitchell thing again? And I was like, I wasn't even really thinking about it, to be completely honest with you. He's like, I want to do a segment on Donovan Mitchell because they're thinking about Mitchell and potentially going back to the Knicks. So I think this is simultaneously hot and not. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's hot to call your shot on any star, but I think to call your shot on this particular star is perhaps one of the more lukewarm of a spicy segment of takes you could make, if that makes sense. Because I think Mitchell is like, that dude just wants to be a Knick in the worst way possible. He's not going to make it to the Mets, so he's going to wear orange and blue, damn it. And it's going to be on the Knicks. And that's just how it's going to go. For those that don't know, somehow his dad has worked for the Mets for like a number of decades now. I think it's been a while. So yeah, it's I'm right there with you on this one, Jeremy. I think it's a very safe assumption. My only thing is it'll come down to cost, because now the Knicks are going to be saying to the Cavs, well, we're not going to pay what you paid like 2 years ago, dude. Like, no freaking way. Like, so if you're hoping to get like a 1-to-1 out of this, like, keep looking, because it's not going to happen. You can get, maybe one of our young players and like a couple of these picks, because this probably isn't it for us. We saw what happened with you guys. Like, you guys thought maybe this was the move to put you over the top, and it wasn't. And obviously it's, we don't think that that's going to be it either. So we're not going to gut our team for this dude, but like, we'll make a move, and I could very well see it happening. That might ultimately be the most likely guy that I could see the Knicks going for as far as the star is concerned.
So in my fantasy world, where I could slip Leon Rose some truth serum and get a one-on-one interview with him, which maybe the interview is kind of the crazier part of that hypothetical. I think I'd want to know, like, how much do you actually want Donovan Mitchell? Because we just saw a summer ago, they were unwilling to go all in on him. And I think the reason for that was him and Jalen Brunson don't make a lot of sense together defensively. And there are a bunch of precedents of small backcourts in the NBA. And we've seen a cap ceiling. Can you say that's better than what Portland had in Dame and CJ? I probably would go that far. I would say I just think CJ McCollum's clearly the fourth best player in that conversation. And you can also make the case the Knicks just got to game 6 of the second round against a team that made the finals with a terrible defender on the court in RJ Barrett. And maybe he played better than that in the playoffs. And maybe there's a difference there. And Donovan Mitchell, like, he's very small, but he got a lot of credit last year, at least in the regular season, for being a much improved defender. I just wonder in the later rounds of the playoffs, and that's like maybe to Jeremy's point, and I think this is a good counter argument, it wouldn't have to be a championship swing because of the contract situation. Like, you can still retain assets to get a third guy that's maybe better than either of those two. And that's the world you're building around, especially if it's Joel Embiid and someone you could say, all right, if he's on the court and he's healthy enough and he retains his athleticism, like at baseline, we're going to have a league average defense. Like, I think it's a fair bet. And I think it's a bold move. I think it's an interesting move. I think Donovan Mitchell is spectacular. I just wonder if there are diminishing returns, like in a world where like Quentin Grimes is no longer your starting shooting guard, even though Mitchell, again, in a vacuum, is a far better player than Grimes. Like, how much better are the Knicks on the court if you just replace those guys 1-for-1? If you replace them with RJ, that's a really small team. But to me, that's almost the more interesting scenario that plays out there.
John, real quick. Because Gavin, I hear you. The only thing I want to say, the Knicks were still comfortable, as they have been through almost every move they've made. They're cool going small. They don't really mind it. It's more just like, what stopped them was really, we feel we don't have to overpay in this case, as opposed to we're concerned about the height, so we're not going to pay too much.
Sure. Can I throw one thing out there? Just like philosophically, they're better when Brunson and Quickly are on the court, and yet they don't start Brunson and Quickly.
Sure. And a lot of that probably is a cause of the Knicks lacking another ball handler off the bench, which is why Quickly is so important there.
That's fair.
But what you said in terms of hey, they get Mitchell for cheaper than they would have, what this point will be 2 off seasons ago. And then they still have the power to go get someone who's an even better player than Donovan Mitchell. That's exactly my mindset as well. Where it's, again, I think Damian Lillard has bought an extra year or two of Giannis Antetokounmpo. But in a year or two from now, it's worth revisiting. Is that a situation where they can do exactly what they did this time with saving themselves? I don't know.
The Mitchell thing was fascinating last summer. I would go so far as to say it would be 2 or 3 times more fascinating if we revisited it next summer for a lot of the reasons you guys already touched on. Like, I'm operating of the mindset that I'm expecting the Knicks to make a move next summer. And the only way that does not happen is if someone, or maybe multiple someone's on this team, took the sort of leap that I want to almost say like totally changes our perception of that player. Like, again, I'm not saying this is going to happen, but if RJ Barrett came out this year and was like, holy crap, this guy is going to be in the all NBA conversation for the next, half a decade. Like, again, I'm not saying that's going to happen, but like almost something on that level, whether it's with RJ or with Quickly or with Grimes, like one of those guys, if like Jalen Brunson started shooting like Steph Curry from behind the arc, like something like that, it totally like really out there, that I personally don't foresee, and that is why I think they will make the sort of trade that we're talking about in regards to Mitchell specifically. I think the better question than like, does Leon Rose want him? Does Leon Rose really want him? I think that's a very good question, but I wonder who he'd ideally want to give up in his perfect. Like, let's just say he wasn't negotiating with Cleveland, he was negotiating with himself. But it's like, you have to meet this bar of like, you have to give up like this amount, if there was a way to quantify such a thing, which obviously there is not. I just wonder in his, like, would he want to give up Quickly? Would he want to give up RJ? Would he want to give up Grimes? Like, who would be the player who's like, okay, I feel most okay about losing this guy or like these 2 guys, as opposed to like, I am, there's no way we could give up player X or player Y. That's what I'm most fascinated by, because I think it would speak to a lot of what they think about this team moving forward,
Would it be tenable to keep RJ and have that start? Because we saw last year the Knicks, when they played 2 bad defenders at a time, and however you want to quantify Randall, there may be 3 bad defenders, like things took a nosedive. And when they got that down to 1, those were, for the most part, not universal, but for the most part, they're better lineups. And granted, RJ's 23, he could get better, but that's what I'd be curious about. Like, would you need to find like an OG type? Obviously that's the higher end of it, but like just a more defensively oriented wing if you went with those 2. And maybe that's Grimes, maybe that's too small, but I almost think RJ would be the odd man out there, but I'm not sure.
But again, we're shooting the shit about something that might happen a year from now, right? Let's say this year RJ goes out there and has not like an all-star season, but a season where, best season of his career type of season I was alluding to with my earlier prediction, and he really puts it together defensively. The shot comes around, like all the stuff that we want and want from him. And it's like, well, shit, like this guy's an ideal starting wing. We can't trade him. Like, and the defense is good enough, right? Not OG Anunoby level defense, but good enough defense. And Mitch has the best season of his career and defensively looks like an absolute cornerstone. Who's to say they wouldn't look at that and be like, you know what? We're just going to go all in on offense with our starting unit.
Yeah.
And we're going to on the bench, and we're bringing nothing but great defenders off the bench. And then we mix and match and like, we make it work. I think this could go in so many different directions. That's why I'm fascinated by the concept of talking about it now, but like there's so many unknowns. That's all.
Yeah. I struggle to see having RJ and Mitchell and Brunson and Randall together.
I do too, to be clear.
Yes. Because we're basically saying, is RJ Barrett's stripes going to change completely? Like in a way that even was better than the best season that he had defensively, which is second year, which also coincided with his best offensive year, because his best offense then leads to his best defense. And I just struggle to see it. And it's like, okay, if it's not RJ Barrett, for example, the math has to work in some capacity. So Is it Julius Randle? I'd be surprised. Is it Emmanuel Quickley if he's on his next contract? It could be. Is it Mitchell Robinson? I don't think so. Like, there's only so much salary filler at a certain point. And again, we could point to the Villanova guys, but I got to tell you, they don't have no trade clauses, but to me, they are here for a long time. And at that point, it feels like process of elimination with every move that the Knicks make, which is why, again, who knows if this will be moot by the time this is recorded. If Emmanuel Quickley is not extended, I would be really surprised, because if there's anything we've seen from this front office moving forward, it's if we really value you, we're going to do everything we can to extend you, unless it's to like clear cap space for Jalen Brunson and Isaiah Hartenstein with the Mitchell Robinson situation. But if you're like Cam Reddish, in the sense of like, we're not going to extend you, we'll figure it out later. Yeah. Later's not going to really work out. There is no later. This is kind of a make or break point. The difference here with someone like Quickley is, can you still have enough salary if you did, like, when you get to free agency and had to do that whole thing? Because then there's sign and trade rules and it's very confusing, and you'd rather deal with the poison pill if he's a player you're thinking of moving. And John, to answer your question with the truth serum, in my mind, it's Quentin Grimes. Just based
is the guy
on is the guy that they would prioritize the most out of the young players, because he's the cheapest for the longest. He is a better defender on ball than Quickley. He takes on tougher assignments than Quickley. Yep. And the thing with Quickley is that I just feel as though, and we know that the Knicks have tried to listen in on calls, as they should for all their players. But when it comes to Quickley, if there's a way to try to replace his role, that's where you think about Rokas Jokubaitis coming over. Whereas if you moved Grimes, now you're thinking about, well, who the hell do we have to fill that role? Like, it's DiVincenzo, but if it's DiVincenzo, who's filling DiVincenzo's role? It's not going to be a rookie. I don't consider Rokas a rookie because he'll be like 24. It's hard for a rookie to make that transition at the age of 18, 19, 20 years old to being that type of defender. So the best thing the Knicks need to or can do is trade from excess. They have excess in one key position. They don't have excess quite as much with wings that are like Quentin Grimes. It's like Quentin Grimes and DiVincenzo. RJ's really his own player. He's his own archetype.
He's one of one.
Exactly. So that's kind of the angle of it. And again, I recognize that it's bold to talk about Donovan Mitchell again, especially when we have a whole season and we want to watch this team specifically. Yeah. But if we're talking about until the next podcast, there we go.
Super quick thing. If you get Mitchell, I don't think Quickley wants to be here anymore, because you're looking at a guy who's on an upward trajectory who would be destined for a smaller role. Like, when is he closing a game if Jalen Brunson and Donovan Mitchell are on this team? So that's interesting in the conversation of him versus RJ.
This isn't. I'll end on this. This will be the cliffhanger that we go to the Locked On Knicks feed with. I am so, of all the players on the Knicks, I'm most certain that Emmanuel Quickley will not be here on opening night of the 24-25 season. I would be utterly shocked, precisely because he's really good. I know that may not make sense to some people.
No, I totally agree with you.
Yeah. So
interesting. That's a good note to end on.
And on that note,
that should have been your prediction instead of Fournier.
Well, maybe it will be on the next part.
I tried to keep it relevant to this season.